So, good evening, everyone. A very warm welcome to all of you for the interaction with our Honorable External Affairs Minister, Dr. X. Jaishankar. It is an honor and privilege to have such an esteemed guest here at IIM Ahmedabad. We now request our Dean of Alumni and External Relations, Professor Saral Mukherjee, sir, to deliver the welcome address.
Good evening, students, colleagues, alumni who are sitting here, and also those who are watching us over the telecast. It's a great pleasure to have Dr. Subramaniam Jaishankar on IMA campus today, delivering a talk. Dr. Jaishankar is India's External Affairs Minister since May 30th, 2019. He is a member of the upper house of India's parliament from the state of Gujarat. He was Foreign Secretary from 2015 to 18, Ambassador to United States 2013 to 15, China 2009 to 13, Singapore 2007 to 9, and Czech Republic 2000 to 2004. He has also served in other diplomatic assignments in embassies in Moscow, Colombo, Budapest, and Tokyo, as well as in the Ministry of External Affairs and the President's Secretariat. He was also President, Global Corporate Affairs at Tata Sons Private Limited from May 2018. Dr. S. Jaishankar is a graduate of St. Stephen's College at University of Delhi. He has a Master's in Political Science and an MPhil and PhD in International Relations from Jawaharlal Nehru University, Delhi. He is a recipient of the Padma Shri Award in 2019 and has written a widely acclaimed best-selling book, The India Way, Strategies for an Uncertain World, which was published in 2020. Dr. Jaishankar, welcome to IMA. Indian Institute of Management from its inception has defined itself not just as a business school, but a school of management. Our alumni are working in diverse sectors, of course corporates, but also in NGOs, in different fields like arts, sports, academics, and varied other fields. We have our alumni who have been working in the Indian Foreign Service in various roles as ambassadors, as consul generals, as spokespersons. In fact, Dr. Jaishankar, the current ambassador to Russia, Ukraine, and Tajikistan is actually IIM Ahmedabad alumni. We have today the next generation of students here who are interested in your talk, and I hope that some of them would be inspired to do their bit for the country, join the Foreign Service, and maybe become ambassadors for tomorrow. So I will not stand between you and your audience. Welcome.
We now request our esteemed guest to address the audience.
Students of IIM Ahmedabad, faculty, guests, those who are virtually, digitally connected. Let me say what a great pleasure it is to be here today and have a chance to interact with you. I unfortunately belong to a generation where they didn't send us here for our mid-career training. So I've not had the benefit of prior exposure. But I was just mentioning that if the Indian ambassador in Moscow and in Ukraine are both graduates of management from here, I think diplomacy and management has a fair chance in that conflict. But today, the topic which I chose to speak was about the transformation of Indian foreign policy over the last decade. When you look at, how do you judge transformation, how do you perceive transformation? One, of course, is the manner in which we look at the world. Today, not just look at the world, how do we interact with the world? Much of that has got easier. Today, it's possible to get a passport in a few days. In fact, people grumble if it is more than a few days. Whereas there was an era when getting a passport was itself a lifetime achievement, and it certainly took a few months, sometimes even longer. But it's also an era where more of us travel abroad as students, as tourists, in business, for work. So our sense of the world, what our expectations are of the world, what our understanding of the world is obviously very different from what it was a decade or two ago. At the same time, what are the consequences of the world are also something which we have come to realize very sharply. For the last 2.5 years, all our lives have been deeply and dramatically affected by something which happened quite far away from us and came to our homes and into our lives as a pandemic. We saw how a conflict can affect people. Many of you would have watched the 20,000 students who were caught in the Ukraine conflict. Or sometimes, it could be what happens on our borders, what could happen due to terrorism in our cities. So there's no question the world means much more to us. It impacts our lives. We must understand it. We must study it more carefully. But actually, that's not what I want to focus on today. I want to focus on the mirror image of that phenomenon. How does the world see us? And part of the reason was I said to myself, okay, I'm coming to an institute of management. So let me try to guess how they, what is their way of looking at my business. And when I looked at the last decade, this transformation that I speak about, I would suggest to you that the transformation has most of all been in the branding of India abroad. And that means, in a sense, you can say, how does the customer see the product? In this case, we are the product, we India, and the customer is the world. So how does India see the world rather than normally what I speak about, which is what are the opportunities and challenges abroad? So it is reflected in how we are treated by the world, how we are respected or not by the world, the extent to which we are welcomed in different societies, or occasionally maybe less, and where are the opportunities which come from all of that. Now, the enhanced branding, the stronger branding that I would suggest has happened to us in the last decade, to my mind, comes from 10 factors. And that's really what I would like to talk to you about. Let me start with the most recent one. I spoke about how the COVID has impacted our lives. And I say this to you as a person who is traveling abroad through the COVID, after the COVID, the COVID's still there, but less so, who has had a chance to compare how others have handled it and listen to them about what they think about us. And people, countries, my counterparts, students like you in other countries, actually are staggered if you tell them that, we have done 2 billion plus vaccinations. And more than, I think, the public or the intelligentsia or the academic communities of other countries, it is actually the policymakers, because the policymakers really understand that it was extremely hard to produce the vaccine in the first place, but to get the shot in the arm was actually an exercise in itself. So for a society to organize itself and get 2 billion shots in the arm is actually a staggering achievement. And it's an achievement that today, because we've all got those shots in the arm, we have normalized it. So I would like you to understand that it is an achievement which is deeply respected by the world, and it's something that we should be very proud of. Now, it's not just the shot in the arm. If you think back maybe a decade, maybe less, normally if something happened and there was a solution, certainly in the medical field, we probably would not have been the first in the queue. It would have happened in Europe, America, it would have found its way slowly to us. I'm not saying we'd be last in the queue, but for sure we'd be somewhere in the second half. And this time, actually, we were not just around the same time as everybody else, but as I said, when it comes to actually organizing ourselves for the vaccination, we managed it. And even today, if you look at the percentages of people who've had their vaccination, we still compare very favorably to a very large number of societies in the world. And here's the really interesting thing when it comes to COVID. The CoWIN platform, the idea that from day one, and I was, thanks to my venerable age, in the first lot of people who managed to actually get a shot. So I think it was March 1, if my memory serves me right. So the Prime Minister got it in the morning, I went in the afternoon. And the fact is, the idea that you got your vaccination, you got your certification, you got your phone message to go for the next one, that it was organized, in a way the cohorts came in the way they did. That kind of, I would say, systematic, digitized handling of vaccination is something which actually others look at us. And I would say today we have, of course, we have built a brand today as a pharmacy of the world, but we have also actually strengthened our branding as a digital society. And that to me is the first reason right now why we are looked at with greater respect by the world. The second reason is the economic recovery. And here there were questions of, very frankly, of judgment, of experience, of really in a crisis, where do you commit your resources, where, in what manner, how much, so that actually you come out of the tunnel in the best possible manner. Now, everybody had a fair shot at this problem. There were people who really gave big breaks to their businesses because they felt that the businesses were struggling, and if the businesses would revive, it would trickle down to the society. But different people handled it differently. We focused a lot on creating social safety nets, and I'll talk about that later. But we also used this period to actually execute a lot of reforms and changes, some of which you could say were overdue. But the fact is today, we are poised for an economic recovery, for a growth of 7-8%, which if you look at the rest of the world, obviously developed economies would have lower growth rates. So I'm not comparing apples and oranges here. But even relatively speaking, I think the world looks at our economic recovery with, again, a great deal of respect. But the other part of it was how, where did we put our resources and what did we do here? I don't really know if we ourselves are fully cognizant of the enormity of what we have done in the last 3 years. When I go out of India, I use a metaphor. I tell them, I have a 800-400 story to tell you. The 800 are 800 million people who, from the time of the lockdown, a few months after the lockdown, till today, are receiving food from the government, so that we never had the kind of problem we had when the Spanish flu was here, which was more people dying of starvation than actually of the disease. And the 400 number is the 400 million people who get money put in their bank accounts every month, which gives them that margin to deal with a very distressing period. And this 800-400 has happened again because we are a digitized society. That we have today, thanks to Aadhaar, thanks to Jan Dhan Yojana, thanks to people having bank accounts, thanks to the bank account, the phone number, wherever required, the bank account, the PAN card, this connection and the ability of the state to actually support its citizens without loss and transmission. This is actually a huge achievement. Now, you could say, okay, well, that's what you're doing at times of distress. But I want to drive home to you that there are actually, in a range of other areas, a vast social transformation which is taking place. The one which, of course, captured the imagination of the world the most was actually Swachh Bharat and toilet building. Because if there was a blot on our public image, this was one. And the fact that we have constructed 100 million toilets, that there is a very visible improvement in the cleanliness, in the sanitation of India, that we actually today rank cities and compete, create a competitive environment for people to improve their conditions of living. That's actually had, again, a very big impact abroad. But if I were to give you some other examples, you're all familiar with the Ujjwala scheme, okay, replacing firewood with LPG. Now, the beneficiaries of Ujjwala scheme exceed the population of Germany. The beneficiaries' last count is 93 million. There is today a scheme called Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, which is to give, to support house building in India. There's an urban variant, which right now 6 million houses have been done. There's the rural Gramin Awas Yojana, which 18 million people have been done. Now, if you consider 24 million houses which have been done in this period, and if you take the average size of an Indian family, which is 4.8, that means 110 million people in the last 3 years have a home of their own, which they did not have before. Now, I could give you other examples. Mudra, the loan scheme. The beneficiaries of Mudra exceed the population of the United States, 350 million people. of which 230 million people are women. So this scale of what is happening in India, in fact, if you even tally up our the various insurance yojanas, between the three of them, the beneficiaries, and there obviously will be overlaps there, are 450 million people. So that sense of India, if there is a feeling that a country is under transformation, actually large parts of the world are looking at us, not necessarily getting into the debates that we have in India. And those debates are natural in a democratic society. But because they are at a distance, in a sense, they are cutting out the clutter and looking at really what is changing in India. And they see an India today which is far more digital, which is far more socially supportive, where the infrastructure is coming up at a very rapid rate, which is much easier to do business. I mean, still far from perfect, but much easier to do business. And where there is a certain buzz and an energy, which I think the world values. Because if you look at the rest of the world, very honestly, as a compulsive traveler, every time I want to feel optimistic, I come back home. So that's really the state of the world. Now, the third factor is actually the impact we are making on the world, because the world is feeling that impact. Now, there are different ways you can quantify it. Our exports today are more. In fact, last year was the highest ever exports we've had, which is $670 billion. Because we are a developing economy with a high rate of growth, obviously our imports are more as well. And our imports are maybe about $100 billion more, $750 billion. But I want you to understand again what this means when you go out. And I've just come back from a part of the world where Indians, even Indian foreign ministers, normally don't travel, or don't travel as frequently as they should, which is Latin America. Now, when I went to countries like Brazil and Argentina, we are today buying multiple billions of dollars of particular products. Say, take edible oil. Our import of edible oil from Latin America alone is today maybe about $4 billion, $5 billion. So what has happened? I don't think it's something which is obvious to us sitting at home. At the other end of the world, India has become the fourth largest trading partner of Argentina and the fifth largest trading partner of Brazil. I bet, I'm pretty sure that surprised many of you. I mean, you would have thought, okay, we'd be trading, but maybe our numbers would be very much less. It's also the benefits the world is discovering in terms of the economic impact we can make, and a lot of that is our human resources. So it could be the R&D side of India, it could be the contract manufacturing, the design contracting that takes place here. It could be today actually physical manufacturing in India, because we have made it easier to do business, because actually the quality of human resources is improving, because there is a culture of innovation and startup and technology in this country. When you have, when the public discourse today says, I've changed the drone policy, we have produced 100 unicorns. That's a very different discourse than we had 5 years ago or 10 years ago. And the world is responding to that, because you can see that, for example, in the volume of the foreign direct investment, which last year was also at an all-time high of $84 billion. So the sense, again, the economic sense I want to convey to you is, for the rest of the world, we are mattering more and more. We are mattering as a market. We are mattering as a producer. We are mattering as an inventor. I cannot tell you how much respect there is for the fact that we made our own vaccine. That has really resonated. So this, you've all heard of Made in India, for sure. But that sense of invent in India is also something which is today getting traction, and I think it's very significantly responsible for upgrading our brand. Now let me move out of the economic side to the political side. You all know we are going through, the world is going through a very complicated conflict in Ukraine, and the world is very polarized as a consequence. Now, in a very polarized world, obviously, all countries come under pressure from this side or that side. The fact that we have taken an independent stance, the fact that we have made decisions which we believe are the right decisions from the perspective of the welfare of our people, that is something, again, the world has noted. So the independence of India's positions, and the balance. I mean, it's not just about us. In many ways, we are also articulating the sentiments and the feelings of a lot of other countries who may not be that confident today in expressing the same. So, to my mind, the fourth reason for the brand improvement is really that a stronger confidence and a more independent voice with which we have spoken out on global issues and made our decisions on that. A fifth one is actually how resolute we have been. How resolute we have been, for example, when we have been challenged in the border areas. 2 years ago, in the middle of COVID, we had the Chinese actually move forces in violation of agreements, and that we stood our ground. That 2 years from then, we have been working it out without making concessions. I think again the world has noted that this is a country which is capable of defending its interests, that it will not yield, that it would be both strong on the ground and vocal in terms of putting out its interests. Now, one part of it, as I said, is obviously about the gains you make, the interests you defend. But the world always also looks like we do at people. How creative are they? How innovative are they in looking at issues? And we have emerged in the last few years as among the more innovative powers when it comes to diplomacy. And two examples of that innovation actually both involve 4 countries. One is a mechanism called the Quad that we revived in 2017. It had a false start a decade ago, and today is actually counted as among the more effective, more credible platforms to deal with shared challenges and common concerns of a lot of countries in the Indo-Pacific area. On the other end, in the Middle East, in West Asia, we are attempting something. It's at an earlier stage. It's something called I2U2. It's a grouping of US, India, UAE, and Israel. And here the focus is much more on the economic, technology, sort of civil society cooperation. But that we have been nimble, we have been creative, we have done something that is very contemporary when it comes to diplomacy, which is a diplomacy which was stuck either in treaties and alliances, or which hoped the UN would step in every time there's trouble, and the UN has been less and less willing or capable of doing it, or that people found bilateral fixes. Now, we have come up with a none of the above answer, which is There are situations where countries have to come together, find ways of working together, not necessarily doing it with all the rigor and the legal commitments that traditional diplomacy is used to. And that actually is something the rest of the world is looking at with a lot of interest. Now, having said that, we are in many ways a very unique society. We have a lot of Indians abroad, about 32 to 34 million Indians or people of Indian origin live and work abroad. I mentioned earlier that we increasingly treat the world not just as a marketplace but also as a workplace. And this determination, willingness on our part to look after our own at times of difficulty, this has also hugely resonated with the world. And we saw that during COVID. Many of you would be familiar with what we call the Vandebharat Mission. And during this period, depending on how you count the numbers, technically about something like, I think, 8 million people plus came back on the Vandebharat missions of various forms. But a very large proportion of them actually were people who were returning home because they were stranded abroad during COVID. And this was the largest, actually, as far as I know, recorded evacuation that any country has ever done in history. And of course, from an institutional point of view, for us in the Foreign Ministry, it meant while everybody was working from home during COVID, our homes were in the office during this period because we were actually working 24/7, 365 days a week in multiple shifts, so that this 7 to 8 million people could actually come home. And this was very important. It was very important because it showed this could be our tourists who were stranded, it could be our students, it could be our workers. You would be surprised how many Indian seafarers there are today in the world. And when COVID happened, in many cases, the shipping lines discharged them at some port. And then they had the challenge of coming back. So how do a country is respected if it demonstrates that willingness to do what it takes to look after its people. And the COVID that way was a situation which compelled us, and we dug deep into our own strengths, and I think surprised ourselves in many ways by how much we could do, just as we did at home through vaccination. I think Vande Bharat was also an example of what all of the government and all of the system approach could do abroad. But you've had also more recently more dramatic examples of that. Operation Ganga during the Ukraine conflict, where it wasn't just that 20,000 students were stuck. They were stuck in the most difficult part of the country, where there was actually fighting going on, where we had to in a sense, persuade the countries involved to halt their operations for our people to come out, and then bring them out while the rest of the country was also on the move, and bring them out to absolutely the other end of a very large country. And that we could do this, again, I've actually had counterparts who began by telling me, we actually got 2 planes out. And so sometimes it's a bit embarrassing. They'll ask you, so how many planes did you get out? So you sort of say, okay, well, I had 90. But the point I am making is, again, you would have seen at that period the focus and the commitment with which the Indian system went to deal with this situation. That you had 5 neighboring countries. In fact, to each one of these countries, a minister was deputed saying, you go there and you stay there till everybody comes back. And you will personally make sure that the people coming back are well looked after and well organized for the return. So I say this again because, time passes by, events happen, people come back, and we then, it's somewhere there at the back of our minds. But you have to understand, abroad, it's one more element of our cumulative image. That it's a country which is not only willing, as I said, to deal with its seafarers and its blue collar or white collar workers abroad, but which will actually go into conflict situations and pull out its people. And then comes the other part, that it's not just about us. We have actually also developed the image of being what we call a first responder. Think back on some of the natural disasters of, say, the last 7-8 years. And, fast backwards a bit more. And I want you to remember the tsunami of 2004, December 2004. When the tsunami happened, a large part of the relief effort actually came from the US, from Europe, from Japan. A lot of tsunami happened, it was an Indian Ocean tsunami. We were the only Indian Ocean country which actually pulled our own weight. But the rest of this zone actually looked beyond the region for assistance because people didn't have the ability or the responsiveness for that situation. Now, look over the recent past. It could be the Nepal earthquake, it could be the Yemen civil war, it could be we had a mudslide in Sri Lanka, actually a water system breakdown in Maldives, a typhoon in Myanmar, cyclone in Mozambique. And at least from Africa till, I would say, Philippines, if something happens today, we have been there, we've been there among the earliest, and the expectation of the region too. And that's what, again, counts in terms of branding. That in the last decade, we have built up a very credible record as a first responder. A first responder not only to their troubles, but every time actually we go in for our own people, and if there's somebody else out there, we bring them back too. It happened at Wuhan. Our first lot of flights which came back when the COVID happened there had foreign nationals in it, even from Ukraine. Many of you heard stories of citizens of other countries who came back. So the idea that, this is not only a country which today has the capability of, looking after its people, it has the generosity also to look after others. And then, of course, there's always the most noble cause: how do we save our planet? And I don't mean that facetiously. There are today existential problems. I think you can see what's happening in Pakistan. The enormity of climate change, I think, is now making itself felt in different ways. It's happened in India too. Most parts of India this year have got more rain than they've had for a long time. Many parts of India, certainly where I live, has experienced heat and cold of a degree which is not normal. So if you are looking at the big issues of the day, to my mind, climate change is one of the biggest issues. It is an existential issue. And so are we the laggards out here, or are we the leaders out here? I think that too is a debate which is increasingly moving forward in a favorable way to us. People today, when they think of India, they don't think coal, they think solar. As I said, digital is one part of our changing image. Renewable is another part of our changing image too. So a country today which, at our level of income, for us to contemplate green growth, to make the adjustments, to embrace the technologies to do that actually requires very bold leadership and a very deep commitment to ourselves as well as to the planet. And I think if you look in the field of climate action, actually it's interesting. in the last few years, there have been two big initiatives, something called the International Solar Alliance and another one called the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, because natural disasters are affecting the infrastructure, so you have to plan for them in advance. Interestingly, actually, both initiatives have come from India, and both today, the Solar Alliance has more than 100 members. The CDRI is moving up into the high double digits. And finally, I would say what adds to the transformational message of India on the move is actually our culture, heritage, and civilization. In 2014, when Prime Minister Modi came to the US, many of you would remember that famous Madison Square Garden event. At that time, I was ambassador in the US, and he addressed the UN. And he shared with us, saying that, look, think about yoga. Think how universal it can become. Everybody in some form is doing it. If it can be collectively, universally motivated and promoted, and really, in a sense, driven by him, we actually went to the UN end of that year, got a resolution passed, got a certain global branding for celebrating yoga. Yoga had a branding, but the idea of the entire world coming together on one day this was taking it to an altogether different level. And this year, in fact, you had the celebration of yoga. As the sun rose, it actually was celebrated around the world. Intuitively, in the minds of people, it is something which is very deeply connected with India and with Indian civilization. Now, along with that, there is a greater promotion of traditional medicine, of health and wellness practices of India. And the interest which the world is today showing in India is something important. It is important for the world's understanding of India, because at the end of the day, we are a civilizational society, which is once again, you can say, taking its place in the leadership of the world. So, if I were to sum it up, to me, an India which is now, all of you, I think, would have seen this probably today and yesterday, 5th largest economy. We were 10th largest a decade ago. So, a 5th largest economy, a digital economy, one which comes out of the pandemic stronger, which today is among the largest, fastest growing major economies of the world, which has a talent and skill and a capability to address a lot of shortages in a very demographically challenged world economy. And a civilizational state which has its heritage, its culture, its experiences to bring. A democracy which debates its problems, which is able to harmonize its interests with those of the world, which can look after its people, almost 1/5 of the world, but which has time and mind space for other people as well. I think that's the brand which, in my view, we have built in the last 10 years, which I believe has really transformed our image. I quite accept that this is work in progress, but I'm very confident that that work will continue. So once again, thank you for your attention, and I will, of course, be happy to address or listen to anything that you might have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Excuse me. Thank you, Minister, for that excellent summary of how indeed India's place in the world has changed over the last decade or so, and how people in the rest of the world look at us, sometimes one needs to be reminded that we are indeed moving forward in great steps, and I think that was very well put together. With your permission, I will kind of set the ball rolling with questions, and then Yakshit as well, and we will also ask the audience to ask you some questions. And in the spirit of we are doing well, but how can we do better? I would like to start off by asking a question about the service, the foreign service itself. You have been a member of the service, and now as minister you head the service. I have always wondered at the sheer masses that the diplomatic corps employ in countries like the US or even Brazil, for that instance. A country of 200 million people has maybe twice the number of diplomats that India has in the field. So in a sense, we are in a sense do not have the mass that one requires to be able to carry things forward on a larger scale than has been the case so far. It's not that we have not been doing a good job. However, how do you see that playing out? You know, when the US has like 8,000 plus diplomats and India is fielding, I don't know, 800, 900,000. Or China has 170 missions and we're at like 125 and so on. So do you see that playing out?
Well, I can give you answers at multiple levels. First of all, I like the idea of having more people, and I hope you can advocate this so that I can persuade the finance minister that I have a good case. Having said that, look, the truth is, though people think we have a large government, when I look at many other countries and polities, we don't. It's not just that our diplomats are thinner on the ground. Our police people are thin on the ground, our administrators are thin on the ground, our doctors and, hospital administrators. So pretty much any part of the state and the state apparatus, I think we have not grown commensurately to the demands of the economy and society. So in diplomacy, I'm facing what is also a general problem. Having said that, I would say, okay, there's a third angle to it. See, we, in an interesting way, we undercount. We as a bureaucracy, we're quite rigid, okay? So what happens, we categorize people and we say, this person is a diplomat and that person is support staff, not a diplomat. So the way we do the bean counting, we narrow the number of people we categorize as diplomats. If you look at a lot of other countries, people we do not categorize as diplomats are categorized by them as diplomats. So there is a lot of truth in what you say. I honestly believe that there should be more diplomats, but I honestly believe there should be more people in other government services as well. I accept the maxim that we should have in a sense minimum government and maximum governance, but from the point of view of the efficiency of the system. I mean, to me, I cited the example of passports. I mean, there were a lot of things in the passport process which we really didn't need to do, and which were tautological, which were, I mean, sometimes ridiculous. I mean, you ask somebody else to certify who you buy. So, I mean, you could certify it yourself, which is what you do now. My take is that it's something which I hope will happen. We have certainly in this decade, I think, created about 25 new embassies. The bulk of them in Africa, because we were very underrepresented in Africa. In fact, I've just come back from opening an embassy in Paraguay. We are opening 2 of them in the Baltics because these are very strong digital societies, very tech savvy people with whom we need deeper ties. So we will grow, but I could always do with more people. Sure.
So just to build on that point a little bit, as we move forward and we need to negotiate all of these different things, including trade agreements, political things, and so on. And with increasing technology deployment across many areas, there would be a need for specialists and generalists. The service itself, as it has evolved over the years, takes in generalists. Maybe some people specialize over time. How does that play out in terms of our ability to be able to generate better outcomes going forward? That division between generalists and specialists, and how that process is managed at the ministry level, at the service level, and so on.
There's a case to be made either way. Okay, if you are super specialized, you miss the woods for the trees. If you are really generalized, you don't see the trees. So you've got to find some balance there. What we try to do, we take the first level of specialization. Particularly in the last 10 years, because I have been associated with the senior management of the ministry for the last 10 years. We have, for example, said the first filter is a kind of a language cultural filter. So if you have learned Chinese, keep going back there. Now, I must admit I am a violation of that rule, okay, but I belong to a different era, and the exception cannot in a sense be the rule in this situation. But for me, the idea that we have strong regional specialization, Chinese, the Russian zone, the Arabic zone, the Spanish zone, the French zone, and I regard even the US actually as a specialization. I think it's not that anybody who learns English can automatically go and navigate the United States. It is a very unique country. Try and get people much more systematized into what you might call area specialization. But we are also at the same time, we encourage people, people who've done trade negotiations, who have done stints in the Commerce Ministry, people who've done multilateral work, people who've done disarmament or I would say technology related, cyber related stuff. So it has to be, it's a balance. You're never exactly going to get it right. You'll have to keep moving it up and down. But there is another part of it, and the part of it is the solution which is outside. A big change that I see in the bureaucracy for the better. By the way, I see a lot of other changes also for the better, but it is the willingness of the system to say, I have a complex issue, the domain expertise is in some institute, in some other organization, it may not be within my narrow silo, and I am prepared to go out there, ask them, harness them, bring them in, and that degree of consultation and interaction with institutions outside, that has actually been very much on the increase. So a lot of what I mentioned, for example, International Solar Alliance. Now, we have worked with a range of people. I mean, in fact, the person who heads it now is a person who used to be in the government, but who's gone up and down. Between he was with Terry for some time. So I think that cross fertilization has been good, but again, I realistically am not going to grow the size of the bureaucracy to meet my demands. So it's much more sensible for me to harness the creativity and energies and knowledge of other institutions. I think that's the fix.
That's good to hear. I hope that we will also be a part of that.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you are already. I mean, we, after all, look at it this way. We have a training institution. So ask yourself, why do we send people to you? Because our belief is that after the training that we do ourselves, there are still gaps in our training, which they will fill if they come to you. So you are actually a model for me.
We look forward to much more, sir. Let me hand over to Yakshit.
Yes, sir. So there's a lot of commonalities that we see with Latin America, as you just mentioned, on the demographics, the middle class economy that we have, the energy demands, and as well as the climate goals that we have. Did we miss out anything since the last 70 years, or to reframe it better, what silver lining did we see right now so that the terms of engagement have been increased? And do you think, are there any kind of synergy that you think can be implied in entering Africa as well from the learnings that we have from Latin America?
So if I understood the first part of your question, you're asking me, did we miss out anything with Latin America?
Yes.
Oh, we missed out a lot.
Yes.
We missed out a lot because, very frankly, I think distance, physical distance created mental distance. You know, you would be surprised sometimes at the questions which are asked at either end about the other end. I would still argue that there are big gaps out there. But what has changed, of course, is because we are, communication, information is much more available today, and trade has also global, become more global. So, it's interesting. I spoke about edible oil. So we in fact import two kinds of oils from Latin America: oil for the stomach, but also oil for the cars. Now, in the old days, people would have said, getting oil from Mexico or Brazil or Guyana, it's so far away, it doesn't make any sense. That's no longer true. So the logistics component of transaction has got so manageable today. So all this is part of a globalizing world. So to my mind, in fact, there is a phase of discovery of each other which awaits us in the India Latin America relationship, and we in the government will have to encourage it and foster it by going there ourselves and setting an example. But I do see in many ways, the sort of trade leads the flag here. That I see Indian businesses there. I could see in mining and metals, in power transmission, in agriculture, in seeds, in chemicals, in IT. Indian businesses are there, and sometimes they're in fairly substantial numbers. But there are still big gaps, and I think that's one region we really need to play catch up. In the case of Africa, we have a kind of a pervasive footprint because almost every African country, first of all, has an Indian community historically, but the question is, how do you deepen that? How do you take a presence and make it into something more substantive? We have especially after a big Africa summit we had in 2015, we have really stepped up our commitments in terms of projects, in terms of training, exchanges with Africa. And as I said, we've opened 18 new embassies in Africa. So today we would be among the countries which have a very intensive Africa presence. The challenge for that again is, how do you translate that into business? And that is happening, because again, if you look at the export figures the year which is just over, we had set a goal of $400 billion. We exceeded that. But a large part of that growth is actually also coming out of of Africa and Latin America, which were previously kind of taken very lightly. So there is scope there to grow, because for us these are relatively unexplored markets.
So what message do we have to offer for the G20 presidency that we are taking up?
It's honestly a bit early in the day, because the baton kind of still hasn't been handed over to us. The summit will be in November in Indonesia, and we have to see how that summit fares before we sort of take over the responsibility. And the reason why I'm cautious here is not because I want to be dodgy about it. There are genuine challenges right now given the polarization of the world. And I think in particular how the repercussions of the Ukraine conflict are playing out in different forums, in different domains. This has become a very big concern. So in the current stage of volatility, to me, 3 months would be a long way off to predict. So I would therefore hesitate. But if I were to do a little bit of forecasting, there's no doubt today energy security is a huge concern for people. I mean, if the price of oil has effectively doubled, it's really hurting a lot of economies, and I mean it's hurting everybody. But it's one thing to be $50,000-$60,000 per capita. It's another thing to be $2,000 per capita. At $2,000 per capita, you don't have the margins really to take that kind of pain. We've also seen it reflect in food inflation. So that also is a cause of concern, not just inflation, shortages as well, and disruptions of various kinds. So trade is getting disrupted. Commodities of various kinds, their availability, and therefore their prices are getting harder to predict. So I would say the entire world is concerned, but clearly the global south, the developing countries, the relatively low income countries, their anxiety is very much stronger because they don't have the resilience, they don't have the resources to deal with this challenge. So in some form, because the G20 at the end of the day is a kind of a economic, it's a very heavily economic platform. It's an economic developmental platform which then gets into politics from time to time. But it's not primarily it's not a security platform. It's I think these concerns about these stresses, the debt situation. I mean, 2-3 years of COVID, and then the Ukraine issue coming on top of it, and then in many cases climate change is coming on top of it. So I mean, you're really getting every possible stress hitting you at the same time. I think, to my mind, in some form, these concerns would be foremost in the mind of people who would be meeting.
So Yakshit heads up our public policy group. He's a PGP2 student. I should also share with you that we now have a JSW School of Public Policy, where we are trying to build connections with policymakers and increase the range of interactions that we have with various governments in the country. Since we are kind of running a little bit short on time, I think maybe it's time to open it up for the audience to ask some questions. So let's go with a few. Do we have a mic that can go around? So over there.
Good evening, Doctor. My question today is in regards to our Indian media, which is clearly struggling with TRPs every day when we watch the news. News today is clearly very biased and more often than not, scripted to put out an image of India that is in sync with the colonial mindset. And this is to please Western audiences and often mislead our own. What role should our media play to do its bit and reverse the colonial mindset? And where are they going wrong?
Can I do one thing? If I could maybe take 3 questions at a go.
Okay.
It might give people a fairer shot at.
Gentlemen, so we have one of our first alumni from the first batch, Mr. Inder Modi. So I'm going to invite him. Go ahead, Inderji.
Sir, you mentioned about rising exports, and you also indicated that the imports have been even more rising much faster. As a result, our trade deficit has been increasing month on month, and therefore the rupee value against dollar has gone down from 70 rupees to 80 rupees a dollar. So do you think we have something more to do in various ways so that the rupee value doesn't go further from 80 to say 100? Thank you.
And one more, maybe from the back over there.
Sir, I have a question for you. Considering the dragon that we have besides us, China, we have had a love-hate relationship with them. So what is India's take, considering recently you said that we have to work jointly and closely if it has to be a decade of India, not a century of Asia. So on the one hand, we want to cooperate with them, but on the other hand, they are showing ulterior motives. So what should be what should India's take be in such a situation?
Okay, thank you. Well, let me start with the media there. Look, I'm not sure, I mean, clearly some of what you said has a basis, but if you look at the colonial, what you call a colonial mindset, a lot of it is, in our case, debates we have within our country, which we seek external validation on those debates. So, you and I will argue, and then you'll say, but somebody in London, this British magazine said it, or that American newspaper said it. Because in your mind, there's a kind of a superior wisdom there, which you are now trying to employ as a backup artillery to your own arguments. My sense is, this is having less and less impact. If you look at how people react, how policy reacts, how even the media reacts. I mean, often people say, well, okay, they may say this, but you shrug your shoulders and you move on. I think what we have seen in the last 20, 30 years is a broader distribution of economic capability in the world. After a lag of about 15 years, that was reflected in a distribution of political influence. Today, I think the challenge is, in a sense, a kind of a cultural, intellectual rebalancing, which follows a phase of economic rebalancing and political rebalancing, which is one of the reasons why actually the Prime Minister on August 15th, said that we need to put that mindset behind us. I mean, it's a mindset issue. It's not an issue of whether I speak to you in English or not. I mean, I can speak to you, if you'd like, in some other language too. It's the thinking which we are verbalizing, which is a issue of concern. My own feeling is, the more I look at any institution, any gathering of people, and try to ask myself, how would the same gathering have been 30 years ago, 50 years ago? And I would urge you to ask yourself that question. And I promise you the answer is, we are far more diverse. We are, in that sense, actually far more democratic. And my ultimate proof of this is the Indian cricket team. You take the Indian cricket team and look at where the Indian cricket team, the origins, the cities they came from, their backgrounds. What were they, say, in 1960? What are they in 2020? And that, to me, would be a very illustrative example. On the issue of deficit and currency, first of all, I'm not an economist, but my common sense understanding of global sort of, I would say, policy tells me a lot of what you're seeing on the currency is not a function of trade deficit. I mean, one currency which has gone down dramatically against the dollar is the euro. It's not that suddenly Europe's trade account has changed. What happens at moments of deep global stress is there's a movement towards the dollar, because still the dollar is the safe harbor for the world. And in fact, if you were to take the Indian rupee vis-a-vis pretty much any other currency in the world, relatively, we have actually been impacted less. And These are some pretty strong currencies we're talking about. You're talking about the euro, you're talking about the yen. I think the real anxiety is the more the economic turbulence as a result of the COVID consequence and the Ukraine conflict continues, we are going to see, challenges here. Not just us, the whole world is going to see that. With regard to the trade deficit, there are two parts to it. One part of it is at a certain stage of development, you are going to import more. It's not just us, everybody in that stage of development has done it. But we are also to blame because we did 20-25 years of globalization where we did not think in terms of developing our supply chains domestically in the way in which we should have, in the way which other countries did. I mean, if you look at a China, Japan, or Korea, a lot of them actually supported their SMEs during the period of growth. In fact, we exposed them to international competition of the most unfair kind. And for us today to say, well, why are we importing more? We're importing more because we neglected sectors of our economy, which we are now trying to rectify. I mean, the whole idea of Atmanirbhar Bharat is that, which is that, we have a primary obligation to our own businesses, and every other country does. I mean, we were one of the few who give other countries not just a level playing field in our economy, in many cases their advantages, including non-market advantages which they have, we allow that to play out in our economy. So that is the correction which we are trying to today bring about. And last issue, how do you work with China? Well, I guess this one led to that automatically. Everybody wants to get along with big countries, especially if they happen to be neighbors. It's sensible, okay? But you want to get along on reasonable terms, on terms of mutual respect and mutual interest. So the issue is not whether we should have good relations or not. I mean, who would say that we don't want good relations? We want good relations. But good relations cannot be at a cost of our national interest. It cannot be at the cost of a disturbed boundary. So I think the reference which you quoted was my hope that we would be able to resolve our differences and get along with what is in our common interest. So that is my hope. Now, whether it is my expectation or not will depend on them.
Thank you so much, Minister, for articulating that for us. China indeed is a lot of anxiety for a whole bunch of people in the country. Since we are almost out of time, may I now take the liberty of inviting my colleague, Professor Anish Sugathan, to give a quick vote of thanks for a really interesting and insightful talk and Q&A.
Dr. Jaishankar, Honorable Minister, absolute pleasure to be able to host you here today evening in the IIM Ahmedabad campus. Building on the theme that you started off with, how COVID has been a transformational event across multiple dimensions. As an educational institution, COVID also has been a transformational experience for us. We all moved online and we were all inundated with a series of webinars. And that is what sort of, reminded us how much we missed a live in-person event like this. So thank you so much. Really grateful that you made this happen on behalf of all the students, the Public Policy Club, the staff, and the entire IMA community. I would like to express our gratitude for accepting the invitation and gracing the occasion, sharing your views. Also, thank you very much for all of you in the audience. I wish we had a little bit more time because I remember the last time we had such a large gathering. That was when Honorable Finance Minister visited us, and the only one grudge she left out was, you softball me with such simple, easy questions. Where were the tough ones? I came prepared for the tough ones. So we don't have much time, unfortunately. Otherwise, I'm sure, our students are capable of throwing a couple of curveballs at you. So thank you. Thank you, all of you, and have a lovely rest of the evening. Thank you once again for coming. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We now invite Professor Saral Mukherjee, Professor Arvind Sahai, and Anurag sir to present the memento.
We're going for some.
You are going from here to the Innovation Incubation and Entrepreneurship Center. So we'll let you go from here and you'll go to the car. And Anurag and his team will accompany you. So that's our logo, this is